The entire kingdom held its breath. In the center of the royal arena, surrounded by 1,000 nobles draped in silk and silver, a 2,000-pound warhorse named Stormbringer stood perfectly still. His dark eyes weren't on the daughters of dukes. They weren't on the heirs of ancient bloodlines. They were locked on a girl in mud-stained boots standing behind a stable gate. Nobody knew her name. Nobody had ever looked at her twice. But the horse that had chosen every Luna for 3 centuries was about to shatter tradition in front of the entire kingdom. Stay until the end to see how she changed everything. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments below. The morning started like every other morning in Mara Ellison's invisible life. She woke before dawn in the cramped servant quarters behind the royal stables, laced up her worn leather boots, and pulled her dark hair into a knot at the base of her neck. The cold air bit at her skin as she stepped into the pre-dawn darkness, carrying a heavy bucket of oats toward the eastern paddock. Around her, the kingdom of Ravarin slept beneath a blanket of frost and starlight. Mara didn't sleep much. She never had. Sleep was a luxury reserved for people who mattered, people with names that echoed in hallways and bloodlines that stretched back to the kingdom's founding wars. She was neither. She was the daughter of a border soldier who died before she could remember his face, raised by an aunt who worked in the palace kitchens, and died when Mara was 12. After that, she simply stayed. Nobody told her to leave. Nobody told her to stay. She existed in the margins, invisible and unremarked upon. She preferred it that way. The stables were her sanctuary. Horses didn't care about bloodlines. They didn't ask questions about lineage or wolf spirits or whether you were born under the right moon. They cared whether you were gentle, whether you listened, whether you understood the language they spoke without words. Mara understood. She moved between the stalls now, murmuring soft greetings to each horse as she passed. Ember, the chestnut mare with the scarred flank. Ash, the gray gelding who hated thunder. Midnight, the young stallion still learning his strength. And then, at the far end of the stable row, separated from the others by reinforced gates and ancient iron bars, was him, Stormbringer. The warhorse stood 17 hands high, black as a moonless sky, with a presence that made even experienced riders hesitate. His coat gleamed like polished obsidian. His eyes burned with an intelligence that was almost unsettling. Legend said he was descended from the first horses that rode with the Wolf Kings, that his blood carried the memory of 1,000 battles. Mara didn't know about legends. She only knew that Stormbringer had been alone in that reinforced stall for as long as she'd worked here, brought out only for ceremonies and never ridden except by the chosen Luna. He had been waiting 3 years for the next Luna to be chosen. Today was the day. Mara paused at his gate, resting her hand on the cold iron. Stormbringer stood in the shadows, watching her with those burning dark eyes. "Big day," she said quietly. "You ready?" The horse didn't move, didn't blink. Mara smiled faintly. "Yeah, me neither." She turned to leave, but something made her pause. A feeling, a pull she couldn't name. She glanced back over her shoulder. Stormbringer had stepped closer to the gate, close enough that his breath misted the air between them, close enough that she could see the faint silver marking on his chest, shaped like a crescent moon. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. Then the bells began to ring. The royal arena sat at the heart of Ravarin's capital like a crown of stone and iron. It had been built 5 centuries ago, designed to hold 10,000 spectators and host the kingdom's most sacred ceremonies. Today, every seat was filled. Nobles from every corner of the realm had traveled for weeks to witness the choosing. Mara watched from a side corridor as servants rushed past, carrying banners. Musicians tuned instruments, and royal guards took positions along the stone balconies. The air buzzed with anticipation and expensive perfume. She wasn't supposed to be here. Servants were meant to stay in the back passages, out of sight. But her supervisor, old Garrett, had sent her to check the arena gates one final time before the ceremony began. "Make sure they're secured proper," he'd growled. "Last thing we need is that beast breaking loose and trampling some duke's daughter." Mara moved quietly along the outer corridor, testing each gate latch as she went. Through the narrow stone windows, she could see the arena floor being prepared. A raised platform stood at the center, draped in royal blue and silver. Around it, hundreds of nobles in silken velvet filled the tiered seating, their voices echoing off the vaulted ceiling. She recognized some of them. Lady Seraphine Valamont, daughter of the Duke of the Northern Reach, with her perfect golden curls and emerald gown. Celeste Harrow, niece of the Master of Coin, draped in sapphire silk. Isadora Blackthorn, cousin to the king himself, sitting in the front row with a crown of white flowers woven into her midnight hair. Every one of them was beautiful, powerful, connected, chosen by their families to stand before Stormbringer and be tested for the role of Luna, queen consort, spiritual leader, and bondmate to the king. Mara finished checking the last gate and pressed herself against the wall as a group of noblewomen swept past, laughing about something she couldn't hear. She didn't belong here, she knew that, but something kept her from leaving. She found a shadowed alcove near the main gate and settled in to watch. The ceremony began with trumpets. King Alaric Thorne entered the arena from the southern archway, flanked by his personal guard. He was young for a king, only 26, but he carried the weight of the crown with a quiet intensity that made people straighten when he passed. His dark hair was cut short, his jaw sharp, his gray eyes cold and assessing. He wore black, as always. No crown, no ornament, just a simple tunic embroidered with the royal wolf sigil in silver thread. The crowd rose as he took his place on the platform. "People of Ravarin," his voice rang out, clear and steady. "Today we honor a tradition that has guided our kingdom for 15 generations. The choosing of the Luna is not a matter of politics or ambition. It is a bond recognized by the ancient spirits, witnessed by the sacred warhorse, and sealed by fate." Mara watched him speak. She had seen the king from a distance many times, riding through the palace grounds, walking the battlements, reviewing troops in the training yard. But she had never heard him speak like this, with the full weight of ceremony behind his words. "Stormbringer has waited 3 years," Alaric continued. "Today, he will choose, and whoever he chooses will stand beside me as Luna of Ravarin, guardian of our people and keeper of our future." The crowd erupted in applause. Mara's chest tightened. She didn't know why. Maybe it was the weight of history in the air. Maybe it was the way the king's voice seemed to carry something deeper than duty. Or maybe it was the fact that, somewhere beneath the arena, Stormbringer was being led toward the gates. She could feel it, that same pull she'd felt in the stable. The first candidate was announced. Lady Seraphine Valamont stepped onto the arena floor, her golden gown shimmering under the sunlight that poured through the open roof. She was stunning, graceful, confident. The crowd murmured approval. The gates opened. Stormbringer entered the arena like a storm made flesh. His hooves struck the stone floor with echoing force. His black coat gleamed. His eyes swept the space with an intelligence that made even the guards step back. He walked slowly toward the platform where Seraphine stood waiting, her hand extended, her smile serene. Stormbringer stopped 10 feet away. He looked at her, and then he turned and walked back toward the gate. The crowd gasped. Seraphine's smile faltered. "Wait." But the warhorse didn't wait. He returned to the holding pen without a backward glance. The arena fell silent. Mara's breath caught. That wasn't supposed to happen. In every choosing she'd ever heard of, the horse at least approached the candidate. Even if he rejected them, there was always a moment of consideration. Stormbringer hadn't even paused. The second candidate was called. Celeste Harrow, draped in sapphire and silver, stepped forward with her head held high. The same thing happened. Stormbringer entered, looked at her, turned, left. By the fourth rejection, the crowd was buzzing with confusion. By the seventh, whispers of concern rippled through the noble families. By the 10th, panic began to set in. "This has never happened before," someone murmured near Mara's hiding spot. "What does it mean? Is the line broken? Is there no Luna?" Mara pressed closer to the wall, her heart pounding. She couldn't see the king's face from here, but she could see his posture, rigid, controlled, but tense. The final candidate was called. Isadora Blackthorn, the king's own cousin, stepped onto the floor. She was beautiful in the way legends described queens, tall, regal, with sharp cheekbones and eyes like winter storms. Her gown was pure white, her hair unbound and flowing. The crowd leaned forward. Stormbringer entered the arena once more. He walked toward Isadora slowly, deliberately. For the first time, he didn't turn away immediately. He stopped in front of her, lowered his head. Isadora reached out, her fingers trembling slightly as they brushed his mane. And then Stormbringer reared, not violently, not in rage, but with a clear, undeniable gesture of refusal. Isadora stumbled back, her face pale. The warhorse turned and walked toward the gates, but this time he didn't return to the holding pen. He walked straight past the gates, into the corridor, toward the stables. Yeet! Mara barely had time to react. One moment she was watching the ceremony from her hidden alcove. The next, guards were shouting, gates were slamming open, and the massive black warhorse was thundering down the stone corridor, directly toward her. She pressed herself flat against the wall, her breath frozen in her chest. Stormbringer slowed as he approached. His hooves echoed in the narrow space. His breath came in heavy clouds of mist. And then he stopped, right in front of her. Mara's heart hammered so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. The horse was massive up close, towering over her, his dark eyes burning with that same impossible intelligence. He didn't move, didn't rear, didn't make a sound. He just looked at her. And in that moment, Mara understood. He wasn't angry, he wasn't confused, he had been searching for her. "What are you doing?" she whispered. Stormbringer lowered his head and gently pressed his forehead against her shoulder. Mara's breath shattered. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. Voices shouted. Guards appeared, followed by handlers, followed by King Alaric Thorn. He stopped at the end of the corridor, his gray eyes sweeping the scene. Stormbringer, standing calmly. Mara, frozen against the wall, her hand hovering uncertainly near the horse's neck. The king's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. Mara's throat closed. She had never spoken to the king, never been this close to him, never been seen by him. I'm nobody, Your Majesty," she managed. "I work in the stables." Alaric stepped closer, his gaze moving between her and the warhorse. "What's your name?" "Mara Ellison." The king studied her for a long moment. Then he looked at Stormbringer, who hadn't moved, his head still resting against Mara's shoulder like a child seeking comfort. Alaric's jaw tightened. "Clear the corridor," he said to the guards. "Now." They hesitated. "Now!" The guards retreated. The king stepped forward until he was only a few feet away. Up close, Mara could see the exhaustion etched into his face, the tension in his shoulders, the weight he carried in silence. "You work with the horses," he said. It wasn't a question. Mara nodded. "Yes, Your Majesty." "And Stormbringer knows you." I feed him. Sometimes I check his water, I talk to him." She swallowed. "I didn't mean—" "He's never done this before," Alaric interrupted softly. "In 300 years of choosings, the war horse has never left the arena, never refused every candidate, never sought someone out." Mara didn't know what to say. The king's gray eyes met hers. "He chose you." The words hung in the air like a sentence. "That's impossible," Mara breathed. I don't have a wolf spirit," Alaric finished. "I know." He stepped closer. Stormbringer shifted slightly but didn't move away. "The ceremony has never failed," the king said quietly. "The horse chooses the Luna, always, without exception. If Stormbringer has chosen you, then tradition and bloodline don't matter. The bond does." Mara's chest tightened. "Your Majesty, I can't— Can you ride?" The question caught her off guard. Yes, a little. I've ridden the training horses." "Then tomorrow morning," Alaric said, his voice steady and unyielding, "you will enter the arena, and we will see what Stormbringer does when the kingdom is watching." He turned to leave, then paused. "Get some rest, Mara Ellison. Tomorrow, everything changes." And then he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the corridor until silence returned. Mara stood frozen, her hand finally settling on Stormbringer's neck. The warhorse huffed softly, as if satisfied. And for the first time in her invisible life, Mara wondered if being seen was the most dangerous thing that had ever happened to her. Mara didn't sleep that night. She lay on her narrow cot in the servants' quarters, staring at the ceiling beams while her mind raced in circles. Tomorrow, the arena, the entire kingdom watching, the warhorse that had chosen a nobody. Around her, the other servants whispered, "Did you hear? The king's bringing that stable girl into the ceremony. It's madness. She doesn't even have a wolf spirit. Stormbringer must be losing his mind. 300 years and he picks her? It'll be a disaster. Mark my words." Mara pulled her thin blanket over her head and tried to breathe. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She had spent her entire life invisible, safe in the margins, unknown. And now the king himself had commanded her to step into the center of the royal arena in front of every noble house in the kingdom and let a legendary warhorse decide her fate. No, not decide her fate. He'd already decided. That was the part that terrified her most. When the first gray light of dawn crept through the narrow window, Mara gave up on sleep. She dressed in her cleanest work clothes, a simple brown tunic and worn leather pants, and braided her dark hair with trembling fingers. She didn't own anything else. No gowns, no jewelry, no silk slippers or embroidered cloaks. She looked exactly like what she was, a servant. And in a few hours, she would stand before the kingdom as what? A candidate? A joke? A mistake the warhorse had made in a moment of confusion? She stepped outside into the cold morning air and made her way toward the stables. Her feet carried her there out of habit, out of the desperate need to do something normal before everything changed. The stables were quiet at this hour. Most of the horses still dozed in their stalls. Mara moved through the familiar space, her footsteps soft on the hay-strewn floor. And then she reached Stormbringer's enclosure. The warhorse stood at the gate, wide awake, his dark eyes locked on her as if he'd been waiting. Mara's breath caught. "You did this," she whispered. "You chose me. Why?" Stormbringer didn't answer, of course. He simply watched her with that unnerving intelligence, his head low, his ears forward. Mara reached through the bars and rested her hand on his neck. His coat was warm beneath her palm, his muscles solid and strong. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do," she said quietly. "I don't know how to be what they need. I'm not like them. I'm not—" "You're talking to the horse." Mara spun around. King Alaric stood in the stable doorway, dressed in black as always, his gray eyes unreadable in the dim light. He didn't look like he'd slept either. Mara dropped into a hasty curtsy, her heart hammering. "Your Majesty, I didn't—" "Don't," Alaric said, stepping forward. "Don't apologize for being here. This is where you belong." He stopped a few feet away, his gaze moving to Stormbringer. The warhorse huffed softly, but didn't retreat. "He trusts you," the king said quietly. Mara swallowed. "I don't understand why." "Neither do I." Alaric's expression was unreadable. "But I've learned not to question what Stormbringer sees. He's older than both of us. Wiser, perhaps." He paused. "The ceremony begins in 2 hours. Are you ready?" "No," Mara said honestly. The corner of Alaric's mouth twitched. Almost a smile. Almost. "Good. Neither was I when I took the crown. Fear keeps you sharp." He turned to leave, then stopped. "Mara." "Yes, Your Majesty?" "When you enter that arena, ignore the nobles. Ignore the whispers. Ignore everything except Stormbringer. If he chose you, there's a reason. Trust that." And then he was gone, leaving Mara alone with the warhorse and the weight of impossible expectations. The royal arena was even more crowded than the day before. Mara stood in the preparation chamber beneath the stone seats, listening to the roar of voices above. Thousands of people had gathered to witness the unthinkable, a servant girl being tested by the sacred warhorse. She could hear the disdain in their murmurs, the disbelief, the anger. A servant named Lila helped her into a simple white tunic, the traditional garment worn by all candidates during the choosing. It was plain linen, unadorned, and far too large. Lila had to cinch it with a leather belt just to keep it from falling off Mara's slim frame. "You don't have to do this," Lila whispered as she adjusted the fabric. "You could leave. Right now. Slip out the back. No one would blame you." Mara met her eyes in the polished mirror. Yes, they would. Better to be blamed for running than humiliated in front of the entire kingdom. Mara didn't answer, because Lila was right. This was humiliation waiting to happen. a stable girl standing before Ravarin's elite, pretending she belonged. But Stormbringer had chosen her, and King Alaric had commanded her to stand. So she would stand. Footsteps echoed in the corridor. A royal guard appeared in the doorway. "It's time." Mara's stomach dropped. She forced herself to breathe, to walk, to follow the guard up the narrow stone staircase toward the light. The roar of the crowd hit her like a physical blow. She stepped onto the arena floor and nearly stumbled. Thousands of faces stared down at her from the tiered seats. Nobles in silk and jewels, merchants in fine wool. Even common folk had crowded into the upper galleries, drawn by rumors of the scandal. Every single one of them was staring at her. Mara's vision blurred. Her hands trembled. She forced herself to keep walking toward the center platform where King Alaric stood waiting. He didn't smile, didn't offer reassurance. He simply watched her approach with those cold gray eyes. When she reached the platform, he spoke, not to her, but to the crowd. "People of Ravarin," his voice rang out, silencing the murmurs. "Yesterday, Stormbringer refused every noble candidate presented to him. This has never happened in the history of our kingdom. Some of you believe it signals the end of tradition. Others believe it signals corruption or madness." The crowd shifted uneasily. "But I believe," Alaric continued, "that the warhorse sees something we do not. He has never been wrong, not once in 300 years, and yesterday he made a choice. Not in the ceremony, not in front of witnesses, but in the quiet of the stables, where truth cannot hide." He turned to Mara. "Step forward." Mara's legs barely obeyed. She moved to the edge of the platform, her heart thundering in her chest. "This is Mara Ellison," Alaric said. "She has no bloodline, no title, no wolf spirit. She is a servant of the royal stables, and yesterday Stormbringer sought her out. He chose her when no one was watching. Today, we will see if that choice holds under the eyes of the kingdom." The crowd erupted. "This is an insult! She's not even noble! The ceremony is sacred. This defiles it." A tall man in crimson robes stood from his seat in the front row, Duke Valamont, father of Lady Seraphine. His voice boomed across the arena. "Your Majesty, with respect, this girl cannot be considered. The choosing requires candidates of noble birth. It is written in the ancient laws." Alaric's expression didn't change. "The ancient laws also state that Stormbringer's choice is absolute. Are you suggesting we rewrite tradition to suit your preference, Duke Valamont?" The Duke's face flushed. "I am suggesting we honor the spirit of the law, not twist it to accommodate—" "A servant?" Alaric finished coldly. "Say it, Duke. Let the kingdom hear what you really think." Valamont's jaw clenched. "This is madness." "Then watch," Alaric said, "and see what the warhorse decides." He gestured toward the gates. The crowd fell silent. Mara's breath came in shallow gasps. Her hands were ice cold. She could feel thousands of eyes on her, judging, dismissing, hating. The gates opened. Stormbringer entered the arena. He moved slowly, his black coat gleaming under the midday sun, his hooves striking the stone floor with deliberate force. Every eye in the arena followed him. He didn't look at the nobles, didn't pause at the platform. He walked directly to Mara and stopped in front of her. The arena held its breath. Stormbringer lowered his massive head and pressed his forehead against Mara's chest. The same gesture he had made in the corridor, gentle, deliberate, unmistakable. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Mara's hands rose instinctively, resting on either side of the warhorse's face. "I see you," she whispered. "I see you." Stormbringer exhaled slowly. Then he bent his front legs and lowered himself to the ground in a bow. The arena exploded. Some nobles shouted in outrage. Others sat in stunned silence. A few even stood and walked out in protest. But Mara barely heard them. Because King Alaric was stepping down from the platform, his gray eyes locked on hers. "Can you ride him?" he asked quietly. Mara's heart stopped. "What?" "Can you ride him?" Alaric repeated. "Right now, in front of the kingdom." Mara looked at Stormbringer, still bowed before her. She had ridden training horses. Gentle mares and calm geldings used to teach children. This was a warhorse, a legend, a creature whose power could crush her in seconds if he chose. "I don't know," she breathed. "Yes, you do," Alaric said. His voice was low, meant only for her. You've known since the moment he looked at you. He chose you, Mara. Not because you're noble, not because you're powerful, because you see him, and he sees you. Now show the kingdom what that means. Mara's hands trembled as she looked into Stormbringer's dark eyes. And then she made her choice. She gripped the horse's mane and pulled herself onto his back. Stormbringer rose smoothly to his feet, as if she weighed nothing. Mara's legs clamped around his sides, her hands tangled in his mane, her breath caught somewhere between terror and awe. The crowd roared, some in fury, some in disbelief, some in something that might have been wonder. Stormbringer began to move. Not a gallop, not a charge. A slow, measured walk around the arena, carrying the servant girl on his back as if she were a queen. Mara held on, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break free. The world blurred around her, faces, voices, the stone walls of the arena. All of it faded until there was only the rhythm of Stormbringer's steps and the warmth of his body beneath her. He completed one full circle, then another. And then he stopped in front of King Alaric and bowed again. This time, with Mara still on his back. The message was unmistakable. The choice was made. Alaric stepped forward and extended his hand to Mara. She took it, her fingers cold against his, and slid down from Stormbringer's back. The king didn't let go of her hand. Instead, he turned to face the crowd, his voice ringing out across the stunned arena. The warhorse has spoken. Tradition has been honored. Mara Ellison is the chosen Luna of Ravarin. The arena erupted into chaos. The rest of the day passed in a haze. Mara was escorted from the arena by royal guards, whisked through corridors she'd never seen before, and deposited in a chamber so large it could have fit her entire servants' quarters inside it 3 times over. Servants she didn't recognize brought her food she couldn't eat. Seamstresses measured her for gowns she couldn't imagine wearing. A stern woman named Morel introduced herself as the royal housekeeper and began rattling off a schedule of lessons, fittings, and ceremonies that made Mara's head spin. You'll need etiquette training, of course, dance lessons, diplomatic protocol, history of the noble houses, and you'll be expected to learn the formal rituals of the Luna's role within the month. Stop, Mara said weakly. Morel frowned. I beg your pardon? Please, just stop. For a moment. The housekeeper's expression softened slightly. She dismissed the other servants with a wave of her hand and waited until the door closed behind them. This is overwhelming, she said. It wasn't a question. Mara nodded, her throat tight. Morel sighed. I've served the crown for 30 years. I've seen 3 kings crowned and 2 Lunas chosen. And I will tell you what I've told each of them. You were not chosen because you were ready. You were chosen because Stormbringer saw something in you that the kingdom needs. Whether you believe it or not doesn't matter. The bond is real. Now you must decide if you're strong enough to carry it. She turned toward the door, then paused. The king has requested your presence in the royal study at sunset. A servant will escort you. And then Mara was alone. She sat on the edge of the enormous bed, her hands folded in her lap, and tried to breathe. Luna. The word felt foreign. Impossible. She was a stable girl. She mucked stalls and hauled water and spoke to horses in the quiet hours before dawn. She didn't attend councils or wear crowns or stand beside kings. But Stormbringer had chosen her, and King Alaric had defended that choice in front of the entire kingdom. Mara pressed her hands against her face and let herself feel the weight of it all. The fear, the doubt, the impossibility. And beneath it all, something else. A tiny spark of defiance. They thought she would fail. The nobles, the courtiers, the kingdom itself. They expected her to crumble under the pressure, to prove them right. But Mara had survived 17 years of being invisible. She had survived loss and loneliness and a world that didn't see her. She could survive this too. Sunset painted the royal study in shades of gold and amber. Mara stood in the doorway, her heart pounding as she took in the space. Books lined every wall from floor to ceiling. Maps covered a massive oak table. A fire crackled in the stone hearth. And King Alaric stood at the window, his silhouette dark against the dying light. Come in, he said without turning. Mara stepped inside. The door closed softly behind her. Alaric finally turned to face her. He looked tired. The weight of the crown seemed heavier in the privacy of this room, away from the eyes of the court. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a chair near the fire. Mara sat, her hands folded in her lap. Alaric poured 2 glasses of wine and handed one to her. She took it, but didn't drink. "You handled yourself well today," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "Better than most noble daughters would have under that pressure." "I didn't do anything," Mara said quietly. "Stormbringer did." "You rode him, in front of the entire kingdom, without training, without preparation. That took courage." Mara shook her head. "It took desperation." Alaric's mouth twitched. Courage and desperation often look the same. He took a slow sip of wine, his gray eyes studying her. "The nobles are furious. Duke Valamont has already submitted a formal protest. 3 other houses have threatened to withdraw their support for the crown if the choosing stands." Mara's stomach twisted. "Then undo it. Tell them it was a mistake. I'll go back to the stables and—" "No." The word was quiet but absolute. Alaric set down his glass. "The choosing cannot be undone. Stormbringer made his decision. To overturn it would destroy the very foundation of our traditions. The nobles know this. They're testing me, seeing if I'll bend." "And will you?" Mara asked. Alaric's eyes hardened. "Never." Silence settled between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire. "I don't know how to be what you need," Mara said finally. "I don't know the court. I don't know politics or diplomacy or any of the things Aluna is supposed to know. I'm going to fail." "Probably," Alaric said bluntly. Mara blinked. "You'll make mistakes," the king continued. "You'll stumble over protocols, offend nobles, say the wrong thing at the wrong time. You'll fail in 100 small ways. That's not reassuring. It's not meant to be. It's the truth." Alaric leaned forward, his gaze intense. "But here's what else is true. Every Luna before you has failed in the same ways. My mother stumbled through her first year. The Luna before her was so terrified of court politics, she locked herself in her chambers for a month. Failure is part of the process." "Then why choose me?" Mara's voice broke slightly. "If you knew I'd fail, why not pick someone who at least had a chance?" "Because Stormbringer didn't give me a choice," Alaric said quietly. "And because I've learned to trust what I don't understand." He stood and moved to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. "When I took the crown 3 years ago, I was 23. Too young. Too inexperienced. The nobles said I'd destroy the kingdom within a year. They plotted against me, tested me, tried to manipulate me at every turn." He turned to face her. "I survived because I stopped trying to be what they expected. I stopped pretending I had all the answers. I made decisions based on what I believed was right, not what was politically safe. And slowly, the kingdom stabilized." Mara met his eyes. "What does that have to do with me?" "Everything," Alaric said. "You weren't chosen because you fit the mold. You were chosen because you don't. Stormbringer sees something in you that the kingdom needs. Trust that, even when you can't see it yourself." Mara's chest tightened. She wanted to believe him, but the doubt was too loud, too heavy. "I don't even have a wolf spirit," she whispered. "No," Alaric agreed. "You don't. But you have something else. You see clearly. You don't carry the weight of noble expectations or family politics. You're not performing for the court. You're just honest." He stepped closer. "The kingdom is drowning in performance, Mara. In facades and power games and endless manipulation. Maybe what we need is someone who doesn't know how to play those games. Someone who sees the truth and speaks it." Mara's throat burned. "And if I can't?" "Then we fail together," Alaric said simply. The words hung in the air between them. Mara looked up at the king, this young man who carried the weight of an entire realm on his shoulders, who had defended her in front of a hostile crowd, who was asking her to stand beside him in a world she didn't understand. And she made a decision. "I'll try," she said quietly. "I don't know if I can do this, but I'll try." Alaric's expression softened. "That's all I'm asking." A knock sounded at the door. "Enter," Alaric called. A guard stepped inside, his face grim. "Your Majesty, forgive the interruption, but there's been an incident." Alaric's entire demeanor shifted. What kind of incident? The stables, sire. Someone released Stormbringer from his enclosure. He's loose in the eastern courtyard. The handlers can't contain him. Mara was on her feet before the guard finished speaking. Take me there, she said. Both men turned to look at her. He won't hurt anyone, Mara continued, her voice steady. But he's upset. Something's wrong. I need to see him. Alaric studied her for a moment, then nodded. Go. I'll follow. Mara didn't wait. She ran. The eastern courtyard was in chaos. Stormbringer stood in the center of the open space, his head high, his eyes wild. 6 handlers surrounded him with ropes and poles, trying to corner him, shouting instructions to each other. Get the chains! Block the gate! Don't let him! Stop! Mara's voice cut through the noise like a blade. Everyone froze. Mara walked into the courtyard, her hands raised, her voice calm. Put down the ropes. Back away from him. Miss, we can't. Now. The authority in her voice surprised even herself. The handlers hesitated, then slowly lowered their equipment and stepped back. Mara approached Stormbringer slowly, her eyes locked on his. The warhorse's sides heaved, his nostrils flared, but he didn't move. What happened? Mara asked softly as she reached him. What's wrong? Stormbringer tossed his head, his eyes rolling. Mara ran her hands along his neck, checking for injuries. Her fingers found something near his shoulder, a long, shallow cut, still bleeding. Who did this? She asked, her voice dangerously quiet. One of the handlers stepped forward. We don't know, miss. When we found him, the gate was open, and he was already cut. We thought maybe he didn't do this to himself, Mara said coldly. Someone hurt him. Someone let him out and hurt him. Footsteps echoed across the courtyard. King Alaric appeared with a contingent of guards. What happened? He demanded. Mara turned to face him, her hand still on Stormbringer's neck. Someone sabotaged him, cut him, tried to make it look like he was dangerous, unstable. Alaric's expression went deadly cold. Who? I don't know. But whoever it was wanted to prove that Stormbringer's choice was wrong, that I'm not fit to be Luna. The king's jaw tightened. He turned to the guards. Find out who had access to the stables tonight. Question every servant, every handler, every noble who was in this wing of the palace. I want answers by dawn. The guards bowed and scattered. Alaric approached Stormbringer slowly, his eyes assessing the wound. Can you calm him? He's already calm, Mara said. He's angry. There's a difference. She pressed her forehead against Stormbringer's neck and closed her eyes. I know, she whispered. I know you're angry. So am I. But we can't let them win. We have to be stronger than their fear. The warhorse's breathing slowed. Gradually, the tension drained from his muscles. Mara opened her eyes and found King Alaric watching her with an unreadable expression. You were right, he said quietly. You do see him. Mara didn't answer. She was too focused on the realization settling over her like a cold wind. Someone in the palace wanted her gone, and they were willing to hurt Stormbringer to make it happen. The wound on Stormbringer's shoulder was shallow, but the intent behind it ran deep. Mara stayed with the warhorse through the night, sleeping in the straw beside his stall while guards patrolled the stable corridors. She woke every hour to check the bandage, to whisper reassurances, to remind him that he wasn't alone. By dawn, the cut had stopped bleeding. But the damage to Mara's fragile sense of safety was irreversible. Someone had tried to hurt Stormbringer, someone in the palace, someone with access and motive, and the kind of cold calculation that made Mara's skin crawl. King Alaric appeared in the stable doorway just as the first light broke over the eastern walls. He looked like he hadn't slept either. Dark circles shadowed his gray eyes, and his jaw was tight with tension. We found something, he said without preamble. Mara rose from the straw, brushing hay from her tunic. What? The guard who was supposed to be watching the eastern wing last night is missing. His post was abandoned around midnight. We found his uniform in the servants' quarters, but he's gone. Mara's stomach dropped. Who was he? A man named Garrett Thorne, low-ranking guard, been with the palace for 6 months. Alaric's expression darkened. And before that, he worked for Duke Valamont's private security. The name landed like a stone in water. Duke Valamont, the father of Lady Seraphine, the first noble daughter Stormbringer had rejected, the man who had publicly protested Mara's choosing in the arena. "You think the Duke ordered this?" Mara asked quietly. "I think," Alaric said carefully, "that someone wants to destabilize the choosing. Whether that's Valamont acting alone or multiple houses working together, I don't know yet. But hurting Stormbringer sends a message. The bond is fragile. You are not protected." Mara looked at the warhorse, standing calmly in his stall, his dark eyes watching them both. "They underestimate him." "They underestimate you, see," Alaric corrected. "You calmed him last night when 6 trained handlers couldn't. You saw the wound when everyone else saw a dangerous animal. That's not luck, Mara. That's the bond." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "The court meets this afternoon. The noble houses are demanding answers. They'll use this incident to argue that the choosing was flawed, that Stormbringer is unstable, that you're a liability. And what will you say?" Alaric's gray eyes held hers. "That the only instability in this palace comes from those who refuse to accept what they cannot control." Mara's throat tightened. "They'll hate you for defending me. Let them." Alaric's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "I didn't take the crown to be loved. I took it to rule." He turned to leave, then paused. "There's a formal dinner tonight. All the noble houses will be in attendance. You're expected to be there." Mara's heart sank. "Your Majesty, I don't know how to—" "I know," Alaric interrupted. "But they need to see you. They need to see that you won't be intimidated, that you're not going anywhere." He met her eyes one last time. "Wear something that makes you feel strong. And remember, you've already survived the hardest part. Everything else is just performance." The royal housekeeper, Morel, arrived at Mara's chambers with an army of seamstresses and a gown that made Mara's breath catch. It was deep midnight blue, the color of the sky just before dawn. Simple in design but exquisite in detail. Silver thread embroidered along the neckline and sleeves in patterns that echoed wolf tracks and crescent moons. The fabric moved like water when Mara touched it. "The king requested it specifically," Morel said, as the seamstresses helped Mara into the gown. "He said you needed armor, not decoration." Mara stared at her reflection in the mirror. The girl looking back at her was a stranger. The gown transformed her from invisible servant to something else entirely. Something that almost looked like it belonged. Almost. Morel stepped forward and placed a thin silver circlet on Mara's head. "The Luna's mark," she said softly. "Traditionally worn only after the bonding ceremony, but the king believes the situation calls for it." Mara touched the cool metal. It felt foreign against her skin, heavy with meaning she didn't yet understand. "They're going to tear me apart tonight," she whispered. Morel's reflection met hers in the mirror. "Probably, but you've already survived worse than a dinner party. You survived being invisible for 17 years. That takes a different kind of strength." The housekeeper's words settled over Mara like a cloak. She took a slow breath and straightened her shoulders. "How do I survive this?" she asked. "The same way you survived everything else," Morel said, "by refusing to disappear." The grand hall blazed with candlelight and tension. Long tables stretched the length of the vast space, covered in white linen and laden with silver platters. Nobles in silk and jewels filled the seats, their voices a low hum of conversation and barely concealed hostility. At the head of the hall, on a raised dais, sat the king's table. Mara entered through the eastern archway, flanked by 2 royal guards. The moment she appeared, the hall fell silent. Every eye turned toward her, every face measured, judged, dismissed. Mara forced herself to walk steadily across the floor, her chin up, her hands clasped to keep them from trembling. She could feel the weight of their stares like physical pressure against her skin. King Alaric stood as she approached the dais. He wore black velvet trimmed in silver, his expression unreadable as he extended his hand to her. Mara took it and let him guide her to the seat beside his throne. The message was unmistakable. She belonged here, at his side. Whether the nobles accepted it or not. Alaric raised his glass. "To the Luna of Raverin," he said, his voice carrying across the silent hall. "May her bond with Stormbringer guide our kingdom toward strength and wisdom." A few nobles raised their glasses in response. Most did not. The dinner began. Mara barely tasted the food placed before her. Her stomach was too tight with anxiety. She focused on keeping her hands steady, her breathing even, her expression calm. Across the hall, Duke Valamont sat with his daughter Seraphine in a cluster of northern lords. He watched Mara with cold calculation, his weathered face unreadable. Beside Mara, Alaric ate sparingly, his attention on the room rather than his plate. He leaned closer and spoke quietly. "You're doing well. I haven't done anything." "Exactly. You're not performing, you're just being present. That's more powerful than you realize." Before Mara could respond, a voice rang out from the center of the hall. "Your Majesty, if I may?" Duke Valamont stood, his glass in hand. The hall fell silent again. Alaric's expression didn't change. "Speak, Duke." Valamont's smile was thin and cold. "I wish to propose a toast, to tradition, to the ancient bonds that have kept our kingdom strong for generations, and to the wisdom required to honor those traditions without compromise." The words were polite. The intent was not. Alaric set down his fork slowly. "An interesting sentiment, Duke, though I wonder if you're proposing we honor tradition or simply the version of tradition that suits your purposes." Valamont's smile didn't waver. "I merely suggest, Your Majesty, that when the foundations of our kingdom are shaken, we must ask ourselves whether we are building something stronger or watching something precious crumble." Murmurs rippled through the hall. Mara's hands clenched beneath the table. She could feel the trap closing. Valamont wasn't just questioning her, he was questioning the king's judgment in front of every noble house in Ravarin. Alaric stood. The hall fell silent. "You speak of foundations, Duke Valamont," the king said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Let me remind you what those foundations are. Not bloodline, not noble privilege, not the comfort of those who benefit from keeping power within their own circles." He stepped down from the dais and walked slowly toward Valamont's table. "The foundation of Ravarin is the bond between ruler and land, between Luna and spirit, between Stormbringer's choice and the kingdom's fate. That bond has never been about what we want. It's about what we need." Valamont's expression hardened. "And you believe we need a servant girl without a wolf spirit standing beside the throne?" "I believe," Alaric said coldly, "that Stormbringer is wiser than both of us, and I will not overturn 300 years of sacred tradition because you're uncomfortable with his choice." The Duke's face flushed. "Uncomfortable? Your Majesty, last night that sacred war horse broke loose and injured a guard. The creature is unstable, the bond is flawed, and this girl—" "Was not present when Stormbringer was released," Alaric interrupted. "The guard who abandoned his post, however, worked for your household 6 months ago. Care to explain that, Duke?" The hall erupted in whispers. Valamont's expression went cold. "Are you accusing me of sabotage, Your Majesty?" "I'm stating a fact. Your former employee disappeared the same night Stormbringer was injured. Draw your own conclusions." Valamont's hands clenched around his glass. "You insult my honor with baseless accusations while defending a girl who has no place in this court. The nobles will not stand for it." "Then let them stand against me," Alaric said quietly. "And see what happens." The challenge hung in the air like drawn steel. Valamont stared at the king for a long moment, then set down his glass and walked out of the hall without another word. Several northern lords followed him. The remaining nobles sat in stunned silence. Alaric returned to the dais and sat down beside Mara. His expression was calm, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the controlled fury in his eyes. "That," he murmured, "is what I meant by performance." Mara's heart was still racing. "You just made an enemy of the most powerful duke in the north." "I already had his enmity," Alaric said. "I just stopped pretending otherwise." The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of forced conversation and cold stares. When it finally ended, Mara escaped to the eastern balcony overlooking the palace grounds, desperate for air that didn't taste like hostility. The night was cold and clear. Stars scattered across the sky like broken glass. Mara leaned against the stone railing and tried to breathe. "You handled that better than I expected." Mara spun around. A woman stepped from the shadows near the doorway. She was tall and elegant, dressed in deep green silk, with auburn hair swept into an elaborate braid. Her eyes were sharp and assessing. Lady Alara Morven, the woman introduced herself. Duchess of the Eastern March. We haven't been formally introduced, but I've been watching you. Mara's guard went up immediately. Why? Alara smiled faintly. Because you're the most interesting thing to happen to this court in a decade. And because I want to know if you're going to survive what's coming. What's coming? War, Alara said simply. Not with swords, not yet. But Valamont doesn't make empty threats. He'll rally the northern houses. They'll demand the choosing be overturned. And if the king refuses, they'll find other ways to remove you. Mara's stomach twisted. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm tired of watching men like Valamont control the narrative. Alara stepped closer, her voice dropping. You're not what they expected. That terrifies them. They thought you'd crumble under pressure, prove them right, validate their belief that bloodline and power are all that matter. But you didn't crumble. And that makes you dangerous. I'm not dangerous, Mara said quietly. I'm just trying to survive. Those two things aren't mutually exclusive. Alara studied her. The king trusts you. Stormbringer chose you. But trust and choice won't protect you from poison, Mara. You need allies. People who can navigate the court, who understand the game being played. And you're offering to be that ally? I'm offering information. What you do with it is your choice. Alara glanced toward the doorway, then back at Mara. There's a council meeting tomorrow morning. The Northern Lords are demanding an investigation into Stormbringer's stability. They'll argue that the warhorse is unfit to make the choosing, that the bond should be dissolved. Mara's blood ran cold. Can they do that? If enough houses vote in favor, they can force a review. And if the review finds grounds to question the bond, Alara let the sentence hang. They'll remove me. Or worse. Alara's expression was grave. Be careful, Mara. And watch what you eat. Trust no one who serves you. Not yet. Before Mara could respond, the Duchess disappeared back into the shadows, leaving her alone on the balcony with the cold wind and the crushing weight of impossible choices. Mara didn't return to her chambers that night. She went to the stables. Stormbringer was awake, as if expecting her. He huffed softly when she entered his enclosure, and Mara sank down into the straw beside him, her back against the wall. They want to destroy the bond, she whispered. They're going to call you unstable, unfit, and they're going to use that to get rid of me. The warhorse lowered his massive head and rested it in her lap. Mara's throat burned. I don't know how to fight this. I don't know the rules. I don't know the game. And I'm so tired of being afraid. Stormbringer's dark eyes watched her with that unnerving intelligence. Mara closed her eyes and let the tears fall. She had tried to be strong, tried to survive the dinner, the court, the hostility. But here, in the quiet darkness with no one watching, she could finally admit the truth. She was terrified, and she had no idea how to win a war fought with words and politics instead of swords. Footsteps echoed as a corridor. Mara's eyes snapped open. She tensed, reaching for the knife she'd started carrying in her boot. King Alaric appeared in the doorway, alone, his expression shadowed. I thought I'd find you here, he said quietly. Mara wiped her eyes quickly. I'm sorry, I shouldn't... Don't apologize. Alaric entered the enclosure and sat down in the straw across from her. Stormbringer lifted his head but didn't move away. For a moment they sat in silence. Then Alaric spoke. When I was 15, my father took me to the northern border. There was a skirmish with raiders from across the mountains. Nothing major, but enough to be dangerous. He wanted me to see what ruling really meant, what it cost. He stared at his hands. A young soldier was injured, gut wound. The healer said he wouldn't last the night. My father knelt beside him and held his hand while he died. Afterward, I asked him why. The soldier was nobody important, no noble blood, no family connections, just a border guard who happened to be in the wrong place. Alaric looked up, his gray eyes meeting Mara's. My father said, because he bled for this kingdom, and every person who bleeds for Ravarin deserves to be seen when they die. That lesson stayed with me. It's why I defend you, Mara. Not because the nobles approve, not because it's politically safe, but because Stormbringer chose you. And you deserve to be seen. Mara's chest ached. What happens at the council tomorrow? They'll demand an investigation. I'll refuse. They'll threaten to withdraw support. I'll remind them that the crown doesn't negotiate with extortion. Alaric's expression hardened. And if they push too far, I'll remind them that I still command the royal army. You'd go to war over me? I'd go to war over principle, Alaric corrected. You just happen to be the embodiment of it. Mara shook her head. I'm not worth that. That's not your decision to make. The words hung between them, weighted with something Mara couldn't name. Alaric stood slowly. Get some sleep. Tomorrow will be difficult, but you won't face it alone. He walked to the enclosure gate, then paused. Mara? Yes, Your Majesty? You're stronger than you think. I've seen soldiers break under less pressure than you've endured. The fact that you're still standing, still fighting, that's not weakness. That's steel. And then he was gone. Mara sat alone in the straw, Stormbringer's warmth beside her, and tried to believe the king's words. The council chamber was a circular room deep in the palace, designed for confrontation. Stone walls, no windows. A round table where no seat held more prominence than another. Mara stood behind King Alaric's chair as tradition dictated for the Luna in waiting. Around the table sat representatives from every major house: Valamont, Morven, Blackthorn, Harrow, Steele, and a dozen others. The air was thick with hostility. Duke Valamont spoke first. Your Majesty, we gather today to address a crisis that threatens the very foundation of our kingdom. The choosing has been compromised. The sacred warhorse, Stormbringer, has demonstrated instability and poor judgment. We cannot, in good conscience, allow a flawed bond to guide our nation's future. Murmurs of agreement rippled around the table. Alaric's expression was carved from ice. You call Stormbringer's judgment flawed because you disagree with his choice. That is not grounds for overturning 3 centuries of tradition. It is grounds, Valamont countered, when the chosen candidate has no bloodline, no wolf spirit, and no training for the role. When the war horse breaks loose and injures guards. When the entire court questions the validity of the bond. Lord Steele, a gruff northern baron, leaned forward. The girl is a liability, Your Majesty. Surely you see that. What I see, Alaric said coldly, is a group of nobles uncomfortable with change. Uncomfortable with the idea that power might not be confined to your bloodlines. This isn't about comfort, Valamont snapped. It's about stability. About ensuring the kingdom's future is secure. And you believe removing the chosen Luna provides that security? I believe, Valamont said slowly, that mistakes can be corrected before they become catastrophic. Alaric's hands clenched on the armrests. Stormbringer does not make mistakes. Then explain last night's incident. The room fell silent. Alaric's jaw tightened. He opened his mouth to respond, and Mara stepped forward. I can explain it, she said quietly. Every head turned toward her. Alaric's eyes widened slightly in warning, but Mara ignored him. She moved around the table until she stood in the center of the circle, surrounded by hostile nobles. Stormbringer was sabotaged, she said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. Someone released him deliberately. Someone cut him. Someone tried to make him look dangerous so you would have grounds to overturn the choosing. Duke Valamont's expression remained neutral. A serious accusation. Do you have proof? The guard who disappeared worked for your household, Mara said, meeting his eyes. That's not coincidence. That's circumstantial, Valamont countered, and easily explained. The man was dismissed from my service months ago for incompetence. If he committed sabotage, it was his own vendetta, not mine. Convenient, Mara said coldly. Valamont's eyes narrowed. You overstep, girl. You stand in this chamber as a courtesy, not as an equal. You have no authority here, no voice, no right to make accusations against your betters. The words landed like a slap. Mara felt the old instinct rising, the urge to shrink back, to disappear, to make herself small and invisible again. But then she felt something else, a pull, faint but unmistakable, like a thread tugging at her chest. Stormbringer. Even separated by stone walls and distance, she could feel him, his presence, his strength. his absolute certainty in the choice he'd made. Mara straightened her shoulders. "You're right," she said quietly. "I'm not your equal. I don't have your bloodline or your power or your centuries of privilege. But Stormbringer chose me anyway, and that terrifies you." The room went deadly silent. "Because if a servant girl can be chosen," Mara continued, "then bloodline doesn't matter as much as you've convinced yourselves it does. If someone without a wolf spirit can stand beside the king, then maybe the power you've hoarded for generations isn't as sacred as you claim." Duke Valamont stood slowly. "You dare." "I dare," Mara interrupted, "because I have nothing to lose. You've already decided I don't belong. You've already determined I'm a mistake. So why should I be afraid of telling the truth?" She turned slowly, meeting the eyes of each noble around the table. "You want to overturn the choosing because it challenges everything you believe about power and worth. But the bond is real. Stormbringer knows it. The king knows it. And deep down, all of you know it too. You're just too afraid to admit it." Silence. Then Duke Valamont smiled. It was not a kind expression. "Well spoken," he said softly, "but words don't change reality. And the reality is this. The northern houses will not support a crown that defies tradition for the sake of sentiment. We demand a formal investigation into Stormbringer's fitness. And if the warhorse is found unstable, the choosing will be dissolved." He looked directly at Alaric. "You have 3 days to decide, Your Majesty. Honor the investigation, or face the consequences." Valamont turned and walked out. Half the council followed him. The aftermath was a storm of whispered arguments and contingency plans. Alaric dismissed the remaining nobles and pulled Mara into a private antechamber. "That was either the bravest or most foolish thing you've ever done," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Probably both," Mara admitted. Alaric paced the small room. "Valamont has the northern houses. If he pulls their support, we lose a third of our military strength and half our trade routes. The kingdom could fracture." "Then what do we do?" Alaric stopped pacing and looked at her. "We prove them wrong. We demonstrate that the bond is real, unbreakable, beyond question." "How?" "The bonding ceremony," Alaric said. "Traditionally held a month after the choosing, but we move it up, tomorrow night, in front of the entire court." Mara's blood went cold. "What does the ceremony involve?" "A ritual as old as the kingdom. You'll ride Stormbringer through the city gates. If the bond is true, he'll carry you without hesitation. The people will witness it. The nobles will have no grounds to dispute it. And if something goes wrong?" Alaric's expression was grim. "Then Valamont wins. The choosing is overturned, and you'll be sent away for your own safety." Mara's hands trembled. "That's a lot of pressure to put on a horse." "It's a lot of pressure to put on both of you," Alaric corrected. "But it's the only way to settle this without bloodshed." He stepped closer, his gray eyes searching hers. "Can you do this?" Mara thought of Stormbringer, the way he'd sought her out, the way he'd bowed before her, the connection she felt even now, thrumming beneath her skin like a second heartbeat. "Yes," she said. "I can." The next evening arrived too quickly. Mara stood in the palace courtyard as the sun set behind the western mountains, dressed in white ceremonial robes embroidered with silver wolves. Her hair had been braided with ribbons the color of midnight. The lunar circlet rested on her head, heavier than ever. Thousands of people lined the streets leading to the city gates. Nobles, merchants, common folk, all gathered to witness the bonding ceremony, to witness her succeed or fail in front of the entire kingdom. Stormbringer was led into the courtyard by royal handlers. He wore ceremonial tack, leather and silver, ancient and sacred. His black coat gleamed in the fading light. King Alaric stood on the palace steps, flanked by his guards and the remaining loyal nobles. Duke Valamont watched from a balcony above, his expression cold and expectant. The high priest, an elderly man in flowing robes, stepped forward and began the ritual words. Mara barely heard them. Her entire focus was on Stormbring. The warhorse stood perfectly still, his dark eyes locked on hers. The priest finished speaking. "Let the Luna approach." Mara walked forward on legs that felt like water. Every eye in the courtyard was on her, every breath held. She stopped in front of Stormbringer and placed her hand on his neck. "We can do this," she whispered. Together. Stormbringer lowered his head, and Mara pulled herself onto his back. The crowd held its breath. The war horse stood motionless for one heartbeat, two. And then he began to walk. Not toward the city gates, toward the palace walls. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Mara's heart stopped. What are you doing? Stormbringer didn't answer. He walked steadily toward the eastern wall where the stables bordered the wild forest beyond. Alaric's voice rang out. Mara! But it was too late. Stormbringer broke into a gallop, racing toward the wall. Mara clung to his mane, terror flooding her veins. He was going to crash, going to throw her, going to prove Valamont right. The warhorse leaped. They sailed over the wall in a perfect arc, landing on the far side in a thunder of hooves, and kept running. Straight into the forest, away from the city, away from the ceremony, away from everything. Mara's scream was lost in the wind as Stormbringer carried her deeper into the wilderness, leaving the stunned kingdom and her shattered future behind. The forest swallowed them whole. Trees blurred past in a rush of shadow and silver moonlight as Stormbringer thundered deeper into the wilderness. Mara clung to his mane, her heart hammering against her ribs, her mind spinning with panic and confusion. "Stop!" she shouted. "Stormbringer, stop!" But the warhorse didn't slow. His hooves pounded the earth with relentless purpose, carrying them farther from the palace, farther from the ceremony, farther from everything that made sense. Behind them, distant shouts echoed through the trees. The king's guards, search parties. But they were falling behind, unable to match Stormbringer's speed through terrain he seemed to know by instinct. Mara's panic crystallized into something sharper. This wasn't random. Stormbringer wasn't running in terror or confusion. His movements were too deliberate, too controlled. He was taking her somewhere. But where? And why? The forest began to change. The cultivated woods near the palace gave way to ancient growth, trees so old their trunks were wider than houses, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out the stars. The air grew colder, wilder. Mara could smell moss and earth and something else, something that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Magic. Old magic. The kind that existed before kingdoms and crowns, before humans tried to tame the world with laws and bloodlines. Stormbringer finally slowed as they entered a clearing ringed by standing stones. Moonlight poured through the gap in the canopy, illuminating moss-covered rocks carved with symbols Mara didn't recognize. The air hummed with energy that made her skin prickle. The warhorse stopped in the center of the clearing and stood perfectly still. Mara slid from his back on trembling legs. "What is this place?" Stormbringer turned his head and looked at her with those impossibly intelligent eyes. Then he walked to the largest standing stone and pressed his forehead against it. The stone began to glow. Mara stumbled backward, her breath catching. Soft blue light spread across the rock's surface, illuminating the carved symbols until they blazed like frozen fire. The light grew brighter, spreading to the other stones, until the entire clearing was bathed in an otherworldly glow. And then the air in front of the center stone began to shimmer. A figure materialized from nothing, translucent at first, then gradually solidifying. A woman, tall and regal, dressed in flowing robes that seemed woven from moonlight itself. Her hair was silver white, her eyes the same burning intelligence Mara had seen in Stormbringer's gaze. Mara's voice died in her throat. The woman studied her with an expression that was both ancient and oddly gentle. When she spoke, her voice resonated like wind through mountains. "At last," she said, "the bond calls, and you answer." Mara found her voice. "Who are you?" "I am Leandra, the first Luna of Rivarin, the one who forged the bond between human and spirit 300 years ago." The spectral woman gestured to Stormbringer. "And this is not merely a warhorse, child. He carries the spirit of the first Wolf King, bound to his bloodline, waiting for the one who could see beyond surface and ceremony to the truth beneath." Mara's mind reeled. "That's impossible." "Is it?" Leandra moved closer, her form flickering like candlelight. "You felt the pull the moment you saw him. You understood his choices when others called them madness. You calmed him with a touch when trained handlers failed. Tell me, Mara Ellison, does that feel impossible?" Mara looked at Stormbringer. The warhorse watched her steadily. and in his eyes she saw something she'd missed before. Not just intelligence, recognition, as if he'd been waiting lifetimes for her. "Why me?" Mara whispered. "I'm nobody. I have no power, no wolf spirit, no—" "You have the only thing that matters," Leandra interrupted. "You have sight, the ability to see what is, not what others insist must be. The nobles look at you and see a servant. They look at Stormbringer and see a tool to validate their power. But you looked at him and saw a living being making his own choice. That is why he chose you." The spirit woman gestured to the glowing stones. "This place is sacred ground, the origin point of the bond. When I first became Luna, I came here to understand what it meant, to learn that the bond was never about controlling the wolf spirit. It was about partnership, equality, seeing each other truly." Leandra's expression grew serious. "The kingdom has forgotten this. They turned the choosing into a political tool, a way to consolidate power through bloodlines. They taught their daughters to perform for Stormbringer, to prove their worthiness, to treat him as a test to pass. Generation after generation, the bond weakened because they stopped seeing the truth. And Stormbringer rejected them," Mara said slowly, understanding dawning. "All of them, because none of them saw him as anything more than a means to power." "Yes," Leandra smiled faintly, "until you. A stable girl who spoke to him as an equal, who saw his pain when he was injured, who trusted him even when he seemed to be destroying your future. That is the bond, Mara. Not submission, not control, partnership." Mara's legs felt weak. She sank down onto the moss-covered ground. "But I don't know how to be what they need. The nobles, the court, the kingdom. I don't fit into their world." "Good," Leandra said sharply. "Their world is broken. It needs someone who doesn't fit, someone who will force them to see differently." The spirit woman knelt beside Mara, her translucent hand hovering near Mara's shoulder. "The bonding ceremony was never meant to be a parade through the city. It was meant to be this, a journey to sacred ground, where the Luna and the spirit confirmed their partnership away from political pressure and performance. Stormbringer brought you here because this is where the truth lives." Mara looked up at the ancient spirit. "What am I supposed to do now?" "Complete the bond," Leandra said simply. "Not for the nobles, not for the king, for yourself and for Stormbringer. Then return to the palace and show them what true partnership looks like." She stood, her form beginning to fade. "The wolf spirit chose you, Mara Ellison, not despite your lack of power, but because of it. You have nothing to lose, which means you have everything to gain. Use that." "Wait," Mara called out. "How do I complete the bond?" Leandra's voice echoed as she disappeared. "You already know. You've known since the beginning. Trust what you see." And then she was gone, leaving Mara alone with Stormbringer in the glowing clearing. Mara sat in silence for a long moment, processing everything. The first Luna, the sacred ground, the truth about the bond. It was too much, too impossible, too— Stormbringer walked over and lowered his head until his nose touched her shoulder. The gesture was so gentle, so familiar, that Mara's eyes burned. She reached up and wrapped her arms around his massive neck. "I see you," she whispered. "I've always seen you. Not as a tool or a test or a symbol, just you." Warmth flooded through her chest. Not painful, but overwhelming, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. The sensation spread through her entire body, racing along her veins, filling every corner of her awareness with golden light. The bond. It wasn't a ceremony or a ritual or a performance. It was simply recognition. Two beings seeing each other clearly and choosing to stand together. Mara gasped as the light faded, leaving behind a connection she could feel humming beneath her skin. She could sense Stormbringer's presence even with her eyes closed, could feel his calm strength, his absolute certainty, his patient wisdom. And she knew, with bone-deep certainty, that he could feel her too. Her fear and her courage, her doubt and her determination. Everything she was, laid bare and accepted. Stormbringer exhaled slowly, and Mara laughed, a breathless, disbelieving sound that echoed through the clearing. "We did it," she said. "We actually did it." The warhorse tossed his head as if to say, "Of course we did." Mara stood, her legs steadier now, her mind clearer. "We need to go back. They'll be searching for us. The king will think—" She stopped, because she could feel something else through the bond. A warning. Danger. Stormbringer's ears flattened. Mara spun around just as figures emerged from the trees. Duke Valamont stepped into the clearing, flanked by 6 armed men in leather armor. Not palace guards, private soldiers. The Duke's smile was cold and satisfied. "Well, this makes things convenient." Mara's blood turned to ice. "How did you find us?" "I've known about this place for years," Valamont said, moving closer. "Ancient texts reference the sacred grove. I had men watching the forest perimeter in case the beast brought you here. And here you are, alone, separated from the king's protection." "Perfect." He gestured to his men. "Take her." Mara backed toward Stormbringer. "You can't do this. The king cannot protect you from an unfortunate accident in the wilderness," Valamont interrupted. "You fled the ceremony. You disappeared into dangerous territory. And tragically, you were killed by bandits before anyone could rescue you. The choosing is dissolved. The kingdom stabilizes. Everyone wins." "Everyone except me," Mara said, her hand finding Stormbringer's mane. "You were never supposed to win, girl. You were a mistake, an anomaly. And I'm simply correcting the error." The soldiers advanced. Mara felt the bond flare in her chest. Not fear, but fury. Stormbringer's fury mixing with her own. "Last chance," Valamont said. "Come quietly, and I'll make it quick. Resist, and my men will make it very, very slow." Mara met his eyes and smiled. "You've made a mistake," she said quietly. "Have I?" "You assumed I was helpless, that I needed the king's protection, that I was still the invisible servant you could dismiss." Mara's hand tightened on Stormbringer's mane. "But I'm not alone anymore, and neither is he." She pulled herself onto Stormbringer's back in one smooth motion. The warhorse reared, not in panic, in challenge. The soldiers hesitated, suddenly uncertain. Valamont's face flushed. "Take her down, now!" But Stormbringer was already moving. He charged directly at the line of soldiers, scattering them like leaves. Mara clung to his back as they burst through the circle and thundered into the forest. Arrows hissed through the air. One grazed Stormbringer's flank, but he didn't slow. Behind them, Valamont's voice echoed. "After them. I want her dead before she reaches the palace." The chase was brutal. Stormbringer wove through trees with impossible agility, leaping fallen logs and streams while soldiers crashed through the undergrowth behind them. But Mara could feel exhaustion creeping through the bond. Stormbringer was strong, but he'd already run hard once tonight, and the wound on his shoulder had reopened. They broke into a clearing, and Mara's heart sank. More soldiers, at least a dozen, forming a blockade between them and the direction of the palace. They were surrounded. Stormbringer slowed, his sides heaving. Mara could feel his calculation through the bond. He could fight, but not against this many, not without risking her. Duke Valamont emerged from the trees, his expression triumphant. "End of the line!" Mara's mind raced. They were outnumbered, outmaneuvered, trapped. But she wasn't helpless. She slid from Stormbringer's back and stood tall, facing Valamont directly. "You're right," she said clearly. "This is the end of the line. For you." Valamont laughed. "Brave words from a dead girl." "I'm not dead yet," Mara said, "and you've just committed treason in front of witnesses." "What witnesses?" Valamont gestured to the forest. "There's no one here but my men." "Wrong." The voice came from the trees behind Valamont. King Alaric emerged from the shadows, flanked by 20 royal guards with drawn swords. His gray eyes were ice and fury. "Your men," Alaric said coldly, "are now surrounded by mine. Drop your weapons or be cut down where you stand." Valamont's face went white. The Duke's soldiers hesitated, looking at each other, then at the king's forces. Slowly, they lowered their weapons. Alaric stepped forward, his gaze locked on Valamont. "Conspiracy to murder the chosen Luna. Treason against the crown. Attempted sabotage of the bonding ceremony. That's 3 separate death sentences, Duke. Care to add more?" Valamont's jaw clenched. "You have no proof. It's her word against mine." Actually, said a new voice, you have mine as well. Lady Alara Morven stepped from the trees holding a small glass orb that glowed faintly. Recording crystal, banned in most courts, but very useful for capturing confessions. I've been following you since you left the palace, Duke. Every word you spoke is preserved in here. Valamont stared at her in disbelief. You betrayed. I served the kingdom, Ilara corrected. Unlike you. Alaric gestured to his guards. Arrest Duke Valamont and his men. They'll be tried for treason at dawn. As soldiers moved to bind the Duke, Valamont's eyes found Mara. This isn't over, he hissed. You think one arrest will change anything? The northern houses will riot. The kingdom will fracture, all because the king chose a servant girl over stability. The kingdom, Alaric said quietly, will survive truth better than it ever survived your lies. He turned to Mara. Are you hurt? Mara shook her head, though her legs felt like water now that the danger had passed. How did you find us? Ilara sent word that Valamont's men were moving into the forest. I gathered my fastest riders and followed. Alaric's expression softened slightly. Though I'll admit, when Stormbringer leaped that wall, I thought I'd lost you for good. He brought me to the sacred grove, Mara said, the origin point of the bond, where the first Luna completed her choosing. Understanding flickered in Alaric's eyes. The old texts mention it. I thought it was legend. It's real, and the bond is complete. Mara placed her hand on Stormbringer's neck. Not the way the nobles expected, but the way it was always meant to be. Alaric studied her for a long moment. Then he did something that made every guard in the clearing freeze. He knelt. Not a shallow political gesture, but a full kneel, one knee on the forest floor, his head bowed. Forgive me, he said quietly. I asked you to perform for the court, to prove yourself by their standards. I should have trusted that Stormbringer knew what he was doing, that the bond would find its own way. Mara's throat tightened. Your Majesty, you don't need to— I do, Alaric interrupted, looking up at her. You are Luna of Reverin, chosen by the wolf spirit, recognized by the sacred grove. And I kneel before that truth, just as every king has knelt before every Luna since the kingdom's founding. He stood slowly, his gray eyes holding hers. The ceremony was interrupted. The nobles will demand answers, but they'll get the truth instead. You completed the bond, in the way that mattered, and no political pressure or noble protest will change that. Mara felt something shift in her chest. Not the bond with Stormbringer, but something else. The weight of acceptance. Of being seen and acknowledged not as a mistake or an anomaly, but as exactly what she was meant to be. We should return to the palace, Alaric said, before the entire court assumes the worst. Mara pulled herself onto Stormbringer's back. The warhorse stood tall, his exhaustion fading now that the danger had passed. Together, Alaric added, meeting her eyes. Side by side, so there's no question who stands beside the throne. They rode back through the forest as dawn broke over the mountains. Mara on Stormbringer, Alaric on his own mount, the royal guards flanking them. Lady Alara rode nearby, the recording crystal safely tucked away. Thank you, Mara said to the Duchess, for following Valamont, for getting proof. Alara smiled faintly. I told you I was tired of watching men like him control the narrative. Besides, you needed allies. Now you have one. Why? Mara asked. Why risk yourself for me? Because you're the first honest thing to happen to this court in decades, Alara said, and because watching you stand up to Valamon at that council meeting was the most satisfying thing I've seen in years. She glanced at the king, who rode ahead, then back to Mara. He trusts you, really trusts you. That's rare for Alaric. Don't waste it. I won't, Mara promised. They emerged from the forest just as the sun crested the horizon, bathing the palace in golden light. The gates stood open, and the courtyard was packed with people, nobles, servants, guards, citizens who'd gathered after hearing about the interrupted ceremony. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as they saw Mara riding Stormbringer, alive and unharmed, with the king at her side. Duke Valamont and his men were led through the gates in chains. Whispers erupted. The Duke was arrested? What happened in the forest? Is the Luna— Alaric raised his hand and silence fell. "People of Ravarin," he called out, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "Last night, our sacred bonding ceremony was interrupted. Many of you feared the worst, that the chosen Luna had fled, that the bond was broken, that our kingdom faced catastrophe." He gestured to Mara. "I am here to tell you that you were right to fear, but not about the Luna. The true threat came from within our own court. Duke Valamont and his men conspired to murder Mara Ellison in the wilderness, to destabilize the choosing, and to force the crown into submission." Shocked murmurs spread through the crowd. "But they failed," Alaric continued, "because the bond between Luna and Spirit is stronger than political ambition, because Stormbringer himself led Mara to the sacred grove, where the first Luna completed her choosing 3 centuries ago, and because this kingdom was built on truth, not the comfort of those in power." He turned to Mara and extended his hand. Mara took it and slid from Stormbringer's back. Together, they walked up the palace steps until they stood above the crowd. "Mara Ellison has completed the bond," Alaric announced, "not by performing for your approval, not by conforming to expectations, but by seeing clearly and choosing courageously. She is Luna of Ravarin, and any who question that will answer to me." The courtyard fell silent. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, a single voice called out, "Long live the Luna!" Another voice joined, then another, until the entire courtyard was chanting, "Long live the Luna! Long live the king!" Mara stood frozen, overwhelmed by the sound washing over her. These people, strangers most of them, were accepting her, acknowledging her, seeing her. Beside her, Alaric squeezed her hand gently. "You did it," he murmured. "Against impossible odds, you survived." Mara looked out at the crowd, then at Stormbringer standing calmly in the courtyard, then at the king whose trust had never wavered. "We did it," she corrected softly, because she understood now. She'd never been alone in this fight. The bond had connected her to Stormbringer. The king had defended her. Alara had risked herself to gather proof. Even the sacred grove had offered guidance. She was no longer invisible, and the kingdom was finally beginning to see. The trial of Duke Valamont began at dawn 3 days later. The Grand Hall had been transformed into a court of judgment, with witnesses gathered in tiered seating and the accused standing in chains before the throne. Every noble house in Ravarin sent representatives. Every merchant guild, every corner of the kingdom wanted to witness what happened when power met consequence. Mara stood beside King Alaric's throne, no longer behind it as tradition once dictated. The Luna's circlet rested on her head, but she wore riding leathers beneath her formal cloak, a deliberate choice that made some nobles whisper and others nod in approval. She was done performing, done pretending to be what they expected. Duke Valamont stood in the center of the hall, his weathered face carved from stone. Even in chains, he carried himself with arrogant pride. His daughter Seraphine sat in the gallery, her perfect composure cracked by red-rimmed eyes and trembling hands. The High Magistrate, an elderly woman named Cassia, who'd served 3 kings, read the charges in a voice that echoed through the vaulted space. Conspiracy to commit murder, attempted assassination of the chosen Luna, treason against the crown, sabotage of sacred ceremony. How do you answer, Duke Valamont? Valamont's jaw tightened. Not guilty. On all counts. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Alaric leaned forward slightly. Present your defense. I have no defense to present, Valamont said coldly, because these charges are fabrications designed to eliminate political opposition. The girl fled the ceremony of her own accord. I merely tracked her into the forest to ensure her safety, as any loyal subject would. What happened there has been twisted by false testimony and illegal recording devices. Lady Alara rose from her seat. The recording crystal is perfectly legal in matters of treason, Duke, and I have your confession preserved exactly as you spoke it. A confession given under duress in the wilderness hardly constitutes evidence in a court of law. Magistrate Cassia's expression remained neutral. The court will hear the recording, then decide its validity. Alara stepped forward and placed the glowing crystal on a pedestal. She murmured an activation phrase, and Valamont's voice filled the hall, cold, confident, damning. Come quietly, and I'll make it quick. Resist, and my men will make it very, very slow. You were never supposed to win, girl. You were a mistake, an anomaly, and I'm simply correcting the error." The words hung in the air like smoke. Valamont's face flushed. "That proves nothing. I was merely—" "Threatening to murder the Luna," Alaric interrupted, his voice cutting like a blade. "In front of armed men, with clear intent. Your words, Duke, not fabrications, not twists, your own voice condemning you." The hall erupted in whispers. Magistrate Cassia raised her hand for silence. "The court recognizes the validity of the recording. Duke Valamont, you stand accused not by rumor or political maneuvering, but by your own admission. Have you anything else to say in your defense?" Valamont's eyes burned with fury. He turned to face the assembled nobles. "You're all fools if you accept this farce. This trial isn't about justice. It's about consolidating power around a servant girl who has no business standing beside the throne. The king has chosen sentiment over stability, and you're all too cowardly to speak the truth." Several nobles shifted uncomfortably. Others looked away. But Lord Harrow, an aging baron from the Eastern Territories, stood. "I've known you 30 years, Valamont, and in all that time you've put your own ambition above the kingdom's welfare. The choosing has stood for 3 centuries. You don't get to overturn it because it doesn't suit your plans." Lady Morven rose next. "The bond is sacred. Whether we understand it or approve of it is irrelevant. Stormbringer made his choice. The Luna completed the bond at the sacred grove. That is our tradition, not noble bloodlines, not political convenience. The bond." One by one, other nobles stood in agreement. Not all of them, but enough. Valamont's expression twisted with contempt. "You'll regret this, all of you. When the kingdom fractures because you followed a foolish king and his pet servant, enough." Alaric's voice was quiet but absolute. He stood, his gray eyes blazing with controlled fury. "You speak of the kingdom fracturing, Duke, but you're the one who tried to break it. You sabotaged Stormbringer. You attempted murder. You placed your wounded pride above the stability you claimed to defend." He descended from the dais and walked slowly toward Valamont until they stood face to face. "I gave you every opportunity to accept the choosing with dignity," Alaric said softly. "I offered compromise. I listened to your concerns, but you chose violence. You chose treason. And now you'll face the consequences." Alaric turned to Magistrate Cassia. "I defer to the court's judgment." Cassia stood, her ancient face grave. "Duke Valamont, the evidence against you is overwhelming. The court finds you guilty on all charges. The sentence for treason is death. However—" She paused, her gaze moving to Mara. "The Luna may speak on your behalf if she chooses. It is her right, as the one you attempted to harm." Every eye in the hall turned to Mara. She felt the weight of their stares, the expectation. Some wanted her to demand Valamont's execution, to prove she could be ruthless, could play the game of power. Others wanted her to show mercy, to prove she was weak, unsuited for the role. Mara looked at Duke Valamont, at the pride and hatred burning in his eyes, at the man who had tried to kill her, who had hurt Stormbringer, who had nearly destroyed the bond for the sake of his own ambition. And she thought of the invisible girl she'd been just weeks ago, the one who survived by staying silent, by making herself small, by never demanding to be seen. That girl would have stayed silent now. But Mara wasn't that girl anymore. She stepped forward. "I do not speak for mercy," she said clearly. Gasps echoed through the hall. "But I also do not speak for execution," Mara continued. "Death would make Duke Valamont a martyr. It would give the northern houses a rallying point, a reason to claim injustice. And it would solve nothing." She turned to face the assembled nobles. "This kingdom has a problem that goes deeper than one man's treason. You've spent generations teaching your children that power comes from bloodline, that worth is measured by ancestry, that some people matter more than others based solely on who their parents were." Her voice strengthened. "Duke Valamont tried to kill me because he truly believed I didn't deserve to stand beside the throne. Not because I'm incompetent or unworthy, but because I wasn't born noble. And he's not the only one who thinks that way. I've seen it in your faces, heard it in your whispers. The servant girl who got lucky. The mistake Stormbringer made." Silence fell across the hall. "But Stormbringer didn't make a mistake. Mara said. He chose someone who would see clearly, who wouldn't be blinded by politics or corrupted by power games. Someone who understood that leadership isn't about control, it's about partnership, about seeing people as they are, not as you want them to be. She looked at Valamont. You tried to murder me because you couldn't imagine a world where a servant girl could be Luna, where power didn't flow only through noble bloodlines, where the bond meant more than political alliances. Mara turned back to Magistrate Cassia. Strip Duke Valamont of his titles, seize his lands, exile him to the border territories with nothing but the clothes on his back. Let him live the life of a common man. Let him learn what it means to be invisible and powerless. Maybe then he'll understand why Stormbringer chose differently. The hall erupted. Some nobles shouted in approval, others in protest. But beneath it all, Mara could feel something shifting, a crack in the old certainties, a question forming in minds that had never questioned before. Magistrate Cassia's mouth curved in something that might have been a smile. The Luna has spoken. The court accepts her judgment. Duke Valamont, you are hereby stripped of rank, title, and lands. You will be escorted to the northern border and left with provisions for 1 week. After that, you survive on your own merits. Or you don't. Valamont's face went ashen. You can't. This is mercy, Cassia said sharply. More than you deserve. Be grateful the Luna has a gentler heart than you do. Guards stepped forward to lead Valamont away. As he passed Mara, he stopped. You'll fail, he whispered. Without noble support, without political knowledge, without power, you'll fail. And when you do, this kingdom will remember that I was right. Mara met his eyes steadily. Maybe, but at least I'll fail honestly. That's more than you can say. Valamont was dragged from the hall, his protests fading into silence. Alaric returned to the dais and turned to face the assembled nobles. Let Duke Valamont's fate be a lesson. This crown serves the kingdom, not political convenience. The bond between Luna and Spirit is sacred, and anyone who threatens that bond, regardless of bloodline or power, will face consequences. He looked at Mara. The Luna has demonstrated wisdom beyond her years. She chose justice over vengeance, growth over destruction. That is the kind of leadership Ravarin needs. The king extended his hand to Mara. She took it and stood beside him, facing the court together. The trial is concluded, Magistrate Cassia declared. Court is dismissed. The nobles filed out slowly, their conversations hushed but intense. Mara could feel the shift in the air. Not acceptance, not yet, but the beginning of something. A crack in the wall of certainty that had surrounded noble privilege for centuries. Lady Alara approached as the hall emptied. That was masterfully done, she said quietly. You gave them justice without blood. Showed strength without cruelty. Half the nobles in that room were ready to condemn you as soft, and the other half were ready to condemn you as vicious. You gave neither side what they wanted. I gave them the truth, Mara said simply, which is often the most dangerous gift of all. Alara smiled. The northern houses will talk about this for months. Some will call you weak, others will call you wise, but none of them will be able to ignore you anymore. After Alara departed, Alaric turned to Mara. You surprised me today. In a good way? In the best way. His gray eyes held warmth she'd rarely seen. I expected you to choose mercy out of kindness, but you chose it out of strategy. You saw further than I did. Mara shook her head. I just saw what would happen if we made him a martyr. The northern houses would rally around his memory. They'd use his death to fuel resentment. But exile? That makes him a cautionary tale instead of a hero. Exactly. Alaric gestured toward the empty hall. You're learning faster than I anticipated. The nobles are going to have a very difficult time dismissing you as an ignorant servant when you're outmaneuvering them politically. I had a good teacher, Mara said. You had instinct, Alaric corrected. I'm just helping you refine it. They walked together through the corridors toward the royal chambers. Guards followed at a respectful distance, but Alaric waved them back, clearly wanting privacy. There's something I need to discuss with you, he said as they reached a private balcony overlooking the eastern gardens. The northern houses that supported Valamont, they're not going to simply accept his exile and move on. They'll look for other ways to undermine your position. I know, Mara said. I can feel it. The way they look at me in council meetings. The whispered conversations that stop when I enter a room. Lady Seraphine has requested an audience with you, Alaric continued. Tomorrow morning. Private. Just the two of you. Mara's stomach tightened. What does she want? I don't know, but she specifically asked to meet without me present. Without guards. Just Luna to noblewoman. That could be a trap. It could be, Alaric admitted. But it could also be an opportunity. Seraphine has influence among the younger nobles. If she accepts you, others will follow. If she opposes you, they'll fall in line behind her. Mara leaned against the stone railing, looking out at the gardens where servants moved like shadows between the hedges. What do you think I should do? I think, Alaric said carefully, that you should meet with her, hear what she has to say, and trust your instinct about whether she's genuine or playing games. And if it is a trap? Alaric's expression hardened. Then she'll learn that the Luna is not as defenseless as she appears. The next morning, Mara waited in the small council chamber, a private room used for confidential meetings. She'd chosen to wear simple clothing, not the formal robes of her position. If Seraphine wanted to speak woman to woman, Mara would honor that. The door opened and Seraphine Valamont entered alone. The noblewoman looked different than she had in the arena months ago. The perfect golden curls were pulled back in a simple braid, the elaborate gowns replaced with practical riding clothes. The serene mask cracked to reveal exhaustion and something that looked like shame. Thank you for meeting with me, Seraphine said quietly. Mara gestured to a chair. Sit. They sat across from each other at the small table, and for a moment neither spoke. Finally, Seraphine broke the silence. My father is gone. Exiled. Stripped of everything he spent his life building. And I should hate you for that. Mara said nothing, waiting. But I don't, Seraphine continued, her voice breaking slightly. Because you were right. Everything you said at the trial, about bloodlines and power and worth, you were right. And I've spent the past 3 days thinking about what that means. She looked up, and Mara saw tears in her eyes. I was raised to believe I deserved to be Luna because of who my father was, because of my bloodline, because I'd been trained since childhood to perform perfectly for Stormbringer. And when he rejected me, I was furious. Not because I loved the king or wanted to serve the kingdom, but because I'd been promised that position like it was mine by right. Seraphine's hands clenched on the table. My father tried to kill you because you threatened that promise. Because if a servant could be chosen, then everything we'd been taught about our superiority was a lie. And I supported him. Not the murder, I didn't know about that, but the protests, the resistance, the attempts to overturn the choosing. I believed you were the problem. Mara watched her carefully, looking for deception, for manipulation, but all she saw was raw honesty and pain. Why are you telling me this? Mara asked. Because I need you to understand that I was wrong, Seraphine said. I need to say it out loud to someone who has every reason to hate me. You showed my father mercy when he deserved none. You chose justice over revenge. And I want to learn how to do that, how to see clearly instead of through the lens of privilege. She took a shaky breath. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking to be your friend. I'm asking if there's a way I can serve this kingdom that doesn't require me to pretend I'm better than everyone else just because of who my ancestors were. Mara studied Seraphine's face, the genuine remorse, the vulnerability, the desperate hope for redemption. She thought about Duke Valamont's hatred and pride, about the nobles who still whispered against her, about the long road ahead. And she made a choice. The Eastern Territories need a governor, Mara said quietly. The previous one died last winter and the position hasn't been filled. It's hard work, managing disputes, overseeing trade, ensuring the border villages have what they need. It's not glamorous, not prestigious, but it's important. Seraphine's eyes widened. You're offering me a position after everything my family did? I'm offering you a chance, Mara corrected, to prove that you meant what you just said, to serve instead of rule, to earn respect instead of demanding it because of your name. She paused. But if you accept all of it, the long hours, the difficult decisions, the fact that you'll be judged on your actions, not your bloodline. Seraphine stood abruptly, tears streaming down her face. I accept. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll prove that I can be better than my father raised me to be." Mara stood as well. "Then we have an agreement. I'll recommend you to the king for the position. But Seraphine, if you betray this trust, there won't be a second chance." "I understand." Seraphine wiped her eyes. "Thank you for seeing something in me worth salvaging." "I see someone who's brave enough to admit she was wrong," Mara said. "That's rarer than you'd think." After Seraphine left, Mara stood alone in the council chamber, her heart pounding. She'd just made a political decision without consulting the king, without seeking approval from advisors. She'd trusted her instinct and offered redemption to the daughter of the man who'd tried to kill her. It was either brilliant or catastrophically stupid. She'd find out which soon enough. The door opened again and Alaric entered. He must have been waiting nearby. "I heard," he said. "The guards reported the conversation." Mara's stomach dropped. "I should have consulted you first. I overstepped." "You made the right call," Alaric interrupted, smiling. "Seraphine has influence among the younger nobles. If she genuinely reforms, if she becomes an example of earning position through merit instead of birth, it will do more to change minds than 100 speeches from either of us." He crossed to her and took her hands. "You're not just learning to navigate politics, Mara. You're reshaping them, one decision at a time." The days that followed brought a strange mixture of progress and resistance. Seraphine's appointment to the Eastern Territories was announced, and the reaction was immediate. Some nobles praised the Luna's mercy and wisdom. Others called it dangerous naivety. But Mara kept moving forward. She established regular audiences with common citizens, where anyone could bring concerns directly to the Luna. She opened the palace library to public study hours twice a week. She created a scholarship fund for talented children from non-noble families. Each change faced opposition. Each reform sparked debate. But slowly, incrementally, the kingdom began to shift. Mara spent her mornings with Stormbringer, strengthening the bond through practice and trust. The warhorse had become more than a symbol. He was her partner in truth, offering silent wisdom through the connection they shared. She could feel his approval when she made good decisions, his gentle correction when she let fear override judgment. One morning, as she rode through the palace grounds, she noticed a crowd gathered near the eastern gate. Curious, she guided Stormbringer toward them. A young girl, no more than 8 years old, stood at the center of the crowd. She wore patched clothes and had dirt under her fingernails, but she held herself with surprising dignity. "I want to meet the Luna," the girl was saying to the guards. "I have something important to tell her." The guards looked uncomfortable. "The Luna is very busy. You can't just—" "Let her through," Mara called out. The crowd parted. The girl's eyes went wide as she saw Mara on Stormbringer's back. Mara dismounted and knelt so she was at the girl's eye level. "What's your name?" "Tessa," the girl said, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm from the southern villages. My papa said you used to work in the stables, that you were nobody special before the horse chose you." "That's true," Mara said gently. "Then maybe—" Tessa's hands twisted in her skirt. "Maybe you'll understand. My brother is really smart. He can do numbers in his head faster than anyone, but the village teacher says he can't come to school anymore because we can't pay. And I thought, maybe if the Luna was once nobody special, maybe she'd help somebody else who's nobody special too." Mara's throat tightened. She saw herself in this girl, the desperate hope, the fear of being dismissed, the courage it took to ask for help. "What's your brother's name?" she asked. "Marcus. He's 12. Mara stood and called to one of her attendants. "Send word to the Royal Academy. I'm recommending Marcus of the Southern Villages for immediate enrollment in the scholarship program. Full funding. Have someone escort the family to the capital for assessment." Tessa's face lit up with disbelieving joy. "Really? You'll help him?" "I'll help both of you," Mara said. "Anyone who's brave enough to walk up to palace guards and demand to see the Luna deserves a chance to learn too." The girl threw her arms around Mara's waist, sobbing with relief and gratitude. The crowd that had gathered began to applaud, and Mara realized something profound. This was why Stormbringer had chosen her. Not because she was wise or powerful or politically savvy, but because she remembered what it felt like to be invisible, to be dismissed, to have doors closed simply because of who you were born to be. She would spend the rest of her life making sure those doors stayed open. The weeks turned into months. Seraphine sent regular reports from the Eastern Territories, proving herself capable and dedicated. The scholarship program grew, funding education for 50 children from common families. The public council seat became one of the most respected positions in government. And through it all, Mara stood beside King Alaric, learning to navigate the complexities of governance while holding on to the clarity that had made Stormbringer choose her in the first place. The formal coronation ceremony took place 6 months after the trial. Mara stood in the royal chapel, dressed in midnight blue silk embroidered with silver wolves. The Luna's circlet had been replaced with a crown, delicate and beautiful, woven from white gold and set with moonstones that caught the light like captured starlight. The chapel was packed, but this time, half the seats were reserved for common citizens chosen by lottery. Merchants sat beside nobles, farmers beside advisors. The mixing of classes would have been unthinkable a year ago. Now it was simply how things were done. The high priestess anointed Mara's forehead with sacred oil and spoke the ancient words of binding. Do you, Mara Ellison, accept the bond between Luna and Spirit? Do you swear to serve Ravarine with wisdom, courage, and truth? To stand as partner to the king and guardian of the sacred connection that sustains this realm? Mara's voice rang clear through the chapel. I do, with everything I am. Then, by the power vested in me by 3 centuries of tradition, I name you Luna of Ravarine. May your reign bring light to darkness and strength to the weary. May you see clearly and speak truthfully. May you lead with compassion and stand with courage. The priestess placed the crown on Mara's head. The chapel erupted in applause, nobles and commoners alike, united in witnessing history. Mara turned to face them, and this time the weight didn't frighten her. She had learned to carry it, to share it with Alaric, with Stormbringer, with the people who believed in what she represented. The celebration lasted 3 days, but Mara's favorite moment came on the final night. She slipped away from the festivities and made her way to the stables, where Stormbringer waited as if he'd known she'd come. Mara entered his enclosure and wrapped her arms around his neck, pressing her forehead against his warm coat. Thank you, she whispered, for everything, for seeing me when no one else did, for choosing me when I didn't even know how to choose myself, for showing me that I was never as small as I thought. Through the bond, she felt his response, not in words, but in emotion. Pride, satisfaction, love. Footsteps approached. Alaric entered the stable, carrying 2 cups of wine. I knew I'd find you here, he said, offering her one. Mara took it and smiled. Where else would I be? Leading the dance? Accepting congratulations? Enjoying the attention? Alaric's eyes twinkled with amusement. I've had enough attention for one lifetime, Mara said. This is where I feel most myself, where I remember who I was before the crown. Alaric leaned against the stall door. And who were you? Someone who talked to horses instead of people. Someone who found peace in quiet corners. Someone who never imagined she'd stand in a chapel wearing moonstones while a kingdom applauded. And now? Mara considered the question. Now I'm someone who talks to horses and people. Someone who finds peace and purpose. Someone who wears moonstones and remembers what it felt like not to matter. She looked up at him. The girl I was makes me a better Luna, because I can't forget what it's like to be invisible. I can't ignore the people everyone else overlooks. Alaric's expression softened. That's exactly why Stormbringer chose you. They stood in comfortable silence, sipping wine while the warhorse dozed contentedly. What happens now? Mara asked. We've changed so much in 6 months. Where do we go from here? Forward, Alaric said simply. We keep pushing, keep reforming, keep proving that a kingdom built on merit instead of birthright can thrive. He set down his cup and took her hand. And we do it together, King and Luna, partners in truth. Mara squeezed his hand, feeling the strength of that partnership, the trust they'd built through crisis and conflict. Together, she echoed. Always. 5 years passed like a river, sometimes rushing, sometimes calm, always moving forward. Mara stood on the palace balcony one morning, watching the sun rise over a kingdom that had transformed beyond recognition. The scholarship program now funded 200 students annually. The public council had expanded to include representatives from every region. Noble families had begun marrying commoners without scandal. The changes hadn't come easily. There had been protests, resistance, moments when Mara thought the old guard would win, would push back hard enough to undo everything they'd built. But they hadn't, because the people had tasted a different kind of kingdom, one where worth was earned, not inherited, and they refused to go back. Alaric joined her at the railing, slipping his arm around her waist with the casual intimacy of 5 years of partnership that had deepened into something more profound than either had expected. "Marcus is graduating today," he said, "top of his class in mathematics." Mara smiled. "Tessa will be insufferable about it. She's been bragging to anyone who'll listen. As she should. Her courage changed her brother's life. And her courage came from hearing about a stable girl who became Luna," Mara said quietly. "That's what I'm most proud of. Not the reforms or the programs, but the fact that children like Tessa believe they can ask for better, that they don't have to accept invisibility as their fate." Below in the courtyard, Stormbringer stood in his usual spot, older now, but still strong, still wise. Through the bond, Mara felt his contentment, his satisfaction with how far they'd all come. "There's something I want to discuss with you," Alaric said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "About succession, about what happens after we're gone." Mara looked up at him. "You've been thinking about this?" "For months. And I believe we need to formalize something. Make it law that the Luna is chosen by bond, not bloodline. That Stormbringer's descendants will choose based on what they see in a person, not who their parents were." "The nobles will resist," Mara said, though her heart was already agreeing. "Some will. But most have accepted the changes we've made. They've seen that the kingdom hasn't collapsed. That opening doors to talent, regardless of birth, has strengthened us, not weakened us." Alaric's gray eyes were intense. "This is our legacy, Mara. Not just changing how one Luna was chosen, but changing how all future Lunas will be chosen, making it permanent." Mara felt the weight of what he was proposing. This wasn't just about them anymore. This was about ensuring that no future servant girl would have to fight as hard as she had, that no future Stormbringer would have to reject dozens of nobles to find someone who saw clearly. "Let's do it," she said. "Let's make it law." They drafted the legislation together over the following weeks, working with progressive nobles and common representatives to craft language that honored tradition while transforming its application. The bond remained sacred. The choosing remained absolute. But bloodline was explicitly removed as a requirement. The vote in the Grand Council was close, but it passed. And on the day the law was signed, Mara returned to the stables one final time as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. She found Stormbringer in his usual place, and she pressed her forehead against his neck the way she had 1,000 times before. "We did it," she whispered. "Everything you saw in me that first day, we made it real. We changed the kingdom. Not just for now, but for everyone who comes after." Through the bond, she felt his response. Not pride in what they'd accomplished, but recognition that this had always been the purpose. That he'd seen a servant girl talking to horses and known she carried the seed of transformation within her. All she'd needed was to be seen, to be chosen, to be given the chance to prove that worth came from within, not from bloodline or status or the circumstances of birth. Mara smiled through tears of gratitude and exhaustion and profound satisfaction. She had been invisible once, a nobody who mucked stalls and spoke to horses in the quiet hours before dawn. But Stormbringer had looked past the surface to the truth beneath, had chosen her not despite her lack of power, but because of the clarity that came from living without it. And in being seen, truly seen, she had learned to see herself, to recognize her own value, to understand that the most important changes often came from the most unexpected places. The servant girl was gone, but the woman who stood in her place carried those lessons forward, that every person deserved to be seen, that power meant nothing without compassion, that the most important bonds were built on honesty and trust. Ravarin would continue to evolve, to struggle with old prejudices and embrace new possibilities. But it would do so with laws that ensured no one else would have to fight as hard as Mara had, with systems that valued merit over birth, with a legacy that proved transformation was possible when you had the courage to see clearly and the strength to stand for truth. In the stable, Stormbringer made a sound that might have been satisfaction, because the bond was strong, The partnership was true, and the kingdom, finally, had learned to see. The warhorse had been right all along.